In the early days of the world, when people began to multiply across the earth, strange things started happening under the heavens. Men built families, women gave birth, and the human race spread from valley to valley and plain to plain. It should have been a season of blessing, but darkness was already moving behind the scenes. There were whispers of beings watching from above, studying the daughters of men with growing desire. The air itself seemed heavy, as if creation could sense that a boundary was about to be broken. Heaven and earth were nearing a moment that would change history forever. It was not a story of ordinary sin alone, but a rebellion that reached into the unseen world. And from that rebellion would come terror, corruption, and judgment. Long before the flood came, the seeds of ruin were already being planted. The story of the Nephilim began there. Among the people of that age, few understood what was unfolding. Fathers worked the ground. Mothers raised children. Elders spoke of the goodness of the Creator and the order he had established in the beginning. But above them, certain celestial beings looked upon the earth with restless hearts. "Look at them," one said as he gazed down at the daughters of men. "They are beautiful." Another answered, "We were not made for them. This is not our place." But desire had already begun to overpower wisdom. Their leader, filled with bold rebellion, spoke with dangerous conviction. "Then let us go down," he said. "Let us take for ourselves what we want." Some hesitated, but others stepped forward. "If we do this," one warned, "there will be no return." The leader lifted his face and replied, "Then let us bind ourselves together, so none will turn back." And so a terrible decision was made. These beings, later remembered in ancient tradition as Watchers, descended from their appointed realm and came into the world of men. They did not come in peace or in obedience, but in defiance of the order God had set. They took wives from among the daughters of men, choosing any they desired. At first, people may have marveled at them, not understanding the full horror of what was taking place. Some women were likely drawn in by their beauty, their power, and their strange knowledge. Others may have trembled, sensing that something unnatural stood before them. "Who are these men?" one mother may have whispered. "They are not like us," her husband answered. "There is something in their eyes that does not belong to this world." What began as fascination soon became fear. The union of heaven and earth in this forbidden way opened a door that should never have been opened, and the world would soon feel the weight of that transgression. In time, children were born from these forbidden unions, and they were not ordinary children. They grew with alarming speed, towering above other boys, stronger than any man, fiercer than wild beasts. Villages stared in dread as these offspring matured into giants, mighty men of old, men of renown. Their footsteps shook the ground, and their voices carried like thunder. "They are too large," people whispered. "No man can fight them." Mothers pulled their children indoors when they saw them coming. Fathers lowered their eyes and prayed not to be noticed. At first, the giants may have been admired for their strength, but admiration soon turned into terror. They took what they wanted, and no one could stop them. The name Nephilim would become linked with dread, with fallen power, and with the ruin of everything good. The earth had begun to produce a race that was never meant to exist. As the giants spread across the land, violence followed wherever they went. Their hunger was enormous, their pride even greater. They devoured food faster than whole communities could produce it. When the harvest was not enough, they seized flocks. When the flocks were gone, they turned on men themselves. "Give us more," one giant roared as terrified villagers backed away. "There is nothing left," an old man pleaded. The giant bent low, his face filled with rage. "Then you will pay for your weakness." Soon the world was filled with fear, bloodshed, and oppression. At the same time, the Watchers corrupted humanity in another way, teaching forbidden knowledge before mankind had wisdom to handle it. They taught sorcery, enchantments, weapons, astrology, and hidden arts that fed pride and destruction. And as people embraced these dark teachings, the earth grew more corrupt with every passing day. Soon the earth began to change under the shadow of these giants. Villages that once lived in peace now lived in constant fear. People whispered to one another at night, afraid even their voices might attract attention. "Did you hear what happened in the valley?" one man asked quietly. "The giants passed through," another replied with trembling lips. Nothing remains. Entire harvests vanished overnight, and families abandoned their homes in search of safety. The Nephilim ruled by strength alone. They took land, livestock, and anything that pleased them. No law restrained them, and no army could oppose them. Humanity, once hopeful and growing, now struggled simply to survive. At the same time, the Watchers continued spreading knowledge that mankind had never possessed before. They taught humans how to shape metal into weapons. They revealed secrets of war, of enchantments, and of hidden powers in plants and roots. Watch carefully, one Watcher told a group of men while holding a piece of glowing metal over fire. With this knowledge, you will become powerful. A young man stared in awe. We could defend ourselves with this, he said. But another whispered nervously, or destroy each other. The Watchers only smiled. Knowledge meant to remain in heaven had now been released upon the earth, and humanity was not prepared for its consequences. As years passed, violence spread like wildfire across the world. Kingdoms rose under the rule of the giants, and ordinary people became nothing more than servants under their control. Work faster, one giant shouted as laborers struggled beneath the burning sun. A man collapsed from exhaustion, and another whispered to him, "Get up. If he sees you lying there, you are finished." Fear ruled every corner of society. Even human leaders began to imitate the cruelty of the Nephilim. Armies formed, weapons multiplied, and men began fighting men with a brutality the world had never seen before. The earth, once created in harmony, was now filled with chaos and bloodshed. Those who still feared God watched these events with sorrow. Among them were elders who remembered the teachings passed down from the righteous line of Seth. One old man lifted his voice in prayer. "Lord, what had become of the world you created?" he cried. Another elder answered quietly, "People have forgotten the Creator. The corruption ran deeper than violence alone. Pride, lust, greed, and hatred consumed the hearts of men. The influence of the giants had twisted the minds of many, and the wickedness of humanity grew greater with every generation. It seemed as if darkness had swallowed the world completely." The scriptures later described this terrible condition with chilling clarity. Every imagination of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually. The earth itself seemed to groan under the weight of such corruption. Crops failed, storms became violent, and disease spread among animals and people alike. "Something is wrong with the world," one farmer said as he looked over his dying fields. "The land itself feels cursed." Another answered quietly, "Perhaps heaven is angry." They did not realize how close divine judgment had come. The Creator had been watching everything unfold. Then came the moment when heaven itself responded. The Lord looked upon the earth and saw the violence, the corruption, and the suffering of mankind. What had begun as a beautiful creation was now filled with cruelty and rebellion. The scriptures say that God was grieved in his heart. "This is not what I intended for them," the Creator declared. His sorrow was not the anger of a tyrant, but the pain of a father watching his children destroy themselves. Yet justice could not remain silent forever. Something had to be done to cleanse the earth. So the Lord spoke with solemn authority. "I will wipe mankind from the face of the earth," he said. "Men and animals, creatures that crawl, and birds of the air, for the earth is filled with violence because of them." The words echoed like thunder through the unseen realm. Judgment was coming. The corruption introduced by the Watchers and their giant offspring had spread so deeply that the world could no longer continue as it was. Only a complete cleansing could restore balance to creation. Yet even in this dark moment, God prepared a path of mercy. Among the countless people living in that corrupted age, there was one man who walked differently from the rest. His name was Noah. While violence ruled the world, Noah sought to honor God. While others embraced corruption, Noah remained faithful. One evening as he walked beneath the open sky, the voice of the Lord came to him. "Noah," the voice said. The man stopped and bowed his head. "Yes, Lord," he answered. God revealed the coming judgment and the plan that would preserve life. "Build an ark," the Lord instructed him, describing a massive vessel unlike anything the world had ever seen. When Noah began building the ark, the people around him could hardly believe what they were seeing. The enormous wooden structure slowly rose from the ground far from any sea. Neighbors gathered and laughed. "Noah, have you lost your mind?" one man shouted. Another mocked him, saying, "Are you expecting the sky to fall?" Noah wiped the sweat from his face and answered calmly, "The Lord has spoken. A flood is coming." They laughed louder. To them, the idea seemed impossible. But Noah continued working day after day, trusting the word he had received. Years passed as the ark grew larger and larger. During that time, Noah continued warning people about the coming judgment. "Turn away from violence," he pleaded. "Seek the Creator while there is still time." But the world ignored him. People continued eating, drinking, marrying, and celebrating as if nothing would ever change. The giants still ruled the land, and human corruption only increased. Few believed the quiet builder working faithfully on dry ground. Yet the day was approaching when the skies would open and the waters of judgment would cover the earth. At last, the day arrived when everything would change. The ark now stood complete, towering over the plain like a silent witness to the coming judgment. Noah stood beside it with his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, watching the sky as dark clouds gathered in the distance. "Father," Shem asked quietly, "is this the day the Lord spoke about?" Noah looked toward the horizon and nodded slowly. "Yes, my son, the time has come." Around them, people continued their daily lives, unaware that history was about to turn. Children laughed in the streets, merchants bargained in the markets, and the giants still walked proudly through the land. None of them believed that the world they knew was about to disappear beneath the waters. Then something remarkable began to happen. Animals started appearing from every direction, walking toward the ark as if guided by an unseen hand. 2 by 2 they came, lions and deer, bird and cattle, creatures great and small. Noah's son stared in amazement as the animals entered the vessel peacefully. "This is the work of God," Japheth whispered. Meanwhile, the people watching nearby laughed and pointed. "Look at this madness," someone shouted. Even the animals are joining Noah's foolish project. But Noah paid no attention to their mockery. He simply guided the animals inside, following every instruction the Lord had given him. When the final preparations were complete, God spoke to Noah once more. "Enter the ark, you and your family," the Lord said. Noah turned to his wife and sons. "Come," he told them gently. "It is time." One by one, they stepped into the enormous vessel, bringing with them the animals and supplies needed for survival. Outside, the sky grew darker and the wind began to rise. The people who had mocked Noah watched with curiosity. "Is the storm finally coming?" one man joked. But then something happened that no human hand could do. The door of the ark closed by itself. The Lord himself had sealed it. Moments later, the first drops of rain began to fall. At first it was gentle, barely more than a mist. A farmer looked up and shrugged. "Just another storm," he said. But the rain did not stop. It grew heavier and heavier until the skies poured down water without mercy. Thunder roared across the heavens, and lightning split the clouds. "This isn't normal," someone shouted as rivers began swelling and the ground turned to mud. Within hours, the valleys began filling with water. Panic spread to the land as people realized something terrible was happening. The rain continued for hours, then days. Soon the waters began rising rapidly across the plains. People ran toward higher ground, desperately trying to escape the growing flood. "Help us," some cried as they pounded on the sealed door of the ark. But the door did not open. Inside the vessel, Noah and his family listened to the storm raging outside. Noah's wife held his arm tightly. "Do you think anyone survived?" she whispered. Noah looked down sadly. "The Lord warned them," he said softly, but they would not listen. As the waters rose higher, even the mighty Nephilim began to realize that their strength meant nothing against the forces of nature. One giant stood on a rocky hill, staring at the floodwaters swallowing the land. "This cannot defeat us," he growled. Another shouted, "Climb higher." For a moment their great size allowed them to remain above the rising water longer than ordinary men. But the storm did not slow. The rain fell without pause, and the fountains of the deep burst open beneath the earth. Rivers overflowed their banks and merged into vast seas that swallowed everything in their path. Soon even the tallest mountains were surrounded by water. The giants who once ruled the world with terror now struggled helplessly against the unstoppable flood. One lifted his voice in rage toward the heavens. "Who has done this?" he roared. But no answer came. Their strength, their pride, and their kingdoms meant nothing before the judgment of God. One by one they disappeared beneath the rising waters, their voices fading into the roaring storm. The mighty men of renown, who once made nations tremble, could not save themselves. Inside the ark, the family of Noah waited as the vessel slowly lifted from the ground. The waters carried it upward, away from the destruction unfolding below. Shem stood near one of the small windows, watching the endless rain. "Father," he said quietly, "the world we knew is gone." Noah placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Yes," he replied, "but the Lord will bring a new beginning." The ark drifted safely above the waters, while the storm continued raging across the earth. For 40 days and 40 nights the rain poured down from the sky. The waters covered the mountains and erased every city, every field, and every kingdom that had once existed. Every living creature outside the ark perished, birds, animals, and all mankind. The earth had been completely cleansed of the corruption that once filled it. The violence of the Nephilim and the wickedness of humanity were washed away beneath the endless waters. Only Noah, his family, and the creatures within the ark remained alive. Finally, after many months, the rain stopped and the waters slowly began to recede. One morning, Noah looked out over the endless sea and spoke quietly to his family. "The storm is ending," he said. "God has remembered us." Hope returned to their hearts as the ark drifted toward a new future. The world that would emerge after the flood would be different from the one that had been destroyed. The giants who once walked the earth were gone, and humanity would have another chance to begin again under the covenant of God. After many days drifting upon the waters, the ark finally came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Inside the vessel, Noah and his family waited patiently for the earth to dry. One morning, Noah opened a small window and released a raven. The bird flew back and forth above the waters, searching for a place to land. Later, he released a dove. The gentle bird returned with nothing, and Noah knew the land was still covered. "We must wait a little longer," he told his family. Days later, he released the dove again, and this time it returned with an olive leaf in its beak. Japheth smiled in amazement. "The earth is healing," he said. Hope filled their hearts as they realized that a new world was slowly emerging. When the ground had finally dried, God spoke to Noah once more. "Come out of the ark, you and your family," the Lord commanded. Noah stepped out onto the fresh earth with deep reverence. The air felt different, clean and quiet after the chaos of the flood. He gathered stones and built an altar to thank the Creator for preserving them. As the smoke of the offering rose into the sky, Noah bowed his head. "You have given humanity another chance," he said softly. God then made a covenant with Noah, promising that never again would flood destroy all life on earth. To seal that promise, the rainbow appeared in the sky, a sign of mercy shining through clouds. For a time the world was peaceful again. Noah's sons began spreading across the land, building families and forming new nations. The memory of the flood remained fresh in their minds, a reminder of what had happened when corruption filled the earth. Parents told their children stories about the giants who once walked among men. They were powerful, an elder might say beside the evening fire, but their strength could not save them from the judgment of God. These stories were meant to warn future generations not to repeat the sins of the past. Yet as centuries passed, something unexpected began to appear once again. Long after the flood, when the descendants of Abraham approached the land of Canaan, strange reports began circulating among the people. Moses had sent 12 spies to explore the land that God had promised to Israel. When the spies returned, their faces were pale with fear. One of them spoke with trembling voice. "The land is rich and beautiful," he said, "but we saw giants there." The camp fell silent. Another spy added nervously, "We saw the descendants of Anak. They are enormous. We looked like grasshoppers beside them." Fear spread quickly through the people as whispers filled the camp. 10 of the spies allowed fear to control their hearts. "We cannot fight them," one declared. "Their cities are strong and their warriors are giants." But 2 men stood up with courage, Joshua and Caleb. Caleb raised his voice above the frightened crowd. "We should go up and take the land," he said boldly. "The Lord will give it to us." The people looked at him in disbelief. Joshua added firmly, "Do not be afraid of them. The Lord is with us." But fear had already taken hold of the majority, and the people began to doubt the promise of God. These giants were known as the Anakim, and they lived in fortified cities throughout the hills of Canaan. They were not the same as the ancient Nephilim before the flood, but their size and strength reminded people of those terrifying beings. Stories of their power spread across the land. Some said they could break spears with their hands or lift stones that several men could not move together. When travelers spoke about them, their voices often carried the same mixture of fear and fascination that had once surrounded the Nephilim. Among these giants was a powerful king named Bashan. His kingdom contained dozens of fortified cities, and his reputation as a warrior spread across the region. Ancient records even described his enormous bed, made of iron and far longer than any normal man would need. When the Israelites approached his territory, marched out with his army to confront them. The sight of the giant king and his soldiers would have terrified any ordinary nation. But God spoke to Moses with confidence. "Do not be afraid of him," the Lord said. "I have given him into your hand." Encouraged by that promise, the Israelites advanced into battle. The clash was fierce, but the outcome was decisive. And his armies were defeated, and his powerful kingdom fell before the people of Israel. Word of this victory spread quickly through the land. "Even the giants cannot stand against the God of Israel," travelers whispered. This victory strengthened the faith of the Israelites as they continued toward the promised land. Years later, after Israel had settled in Canaan, another giant rose to challenge them. His name was Goliath of Gath, a towering warrior from the Philistine army. Every morning he walked into the valley between the two armies and shouted his challenge. "Choose a man to fight me," he roared. "If he defeats me, we will serve you. But if I defeat him, you will serve us." For 40 days the giant mocked the armies of Israel, and no soldier dared to face him. Even King Saul remained silent with fear. Then one day a young shepherd arrived at the battlefield, carrying food for his older brothers. His name was David. When he heard Goliath mocking the armies of God, his eyes filled with determination. Who was this Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David asked. His brothers tried to silence him. "You are only a boy," they warned. But David refused to back down. "The Lord who delivered me from the lion and the bear will deliver me from this giant," he declared. King Saul looked at the young shepherd with doubt. "You cannot fight him," Saul said. "You are only a youth, and he has been a warrior since his youth." But David answered with calm confidence. "I come in the name of the Lord," he said. Rejecting heavy armor, he took only his sling and 5 smooth stones from a nearby stream. Then he walked toward the giant who towered above him. Goliath laughed when he saw David approaching. "Am I a dog and you come to me with sticks?" the giant mocked. But David stood his ground. "You come against me with sword and spear," he replied boldly, "but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." With a swift motion, David placed a stone in his sling and launched it toward the giant. The stone struck Goliath in the forehead, and the giant collapsed to the ground. The battlefield fell silent for a moment before erupting in astonishment. The victory of David sent shockwaves through the region. The giant who had terrified armies had been defeated by a shepherd boy with a simple stone. From that day forward, David's name became a symbol of courage and faith. Other giants from the Philistine lands would appear in later battles, but they too were eventually defeated by David's warriors. The era of giants was coming to an end. Looking back across these events, the story of the giants carries a deeper message. The Nephilim and their descendants represented more than physical enemies. They symbolize the corruption and arrogance that rise when humanity turns away from God. Each time giants appeared in the biblical narrative, they tested the faith of God's people. Those who looked only at their size were filled with fear, but those who trusted in God found victory. The giants who once walked the earth have long since passed into history. Their cities have vanished, their bones turned to dust, and their kingdoms forgotten. Yet the lesson of their story remains. No matter how powerful an enemy may appear, faith in God is greater than any giant. Just as David stood before Goliath with courage, every generation is called to face its own giants with trust in Creator. The story that began with rebellion in the days before the flood ultimately ends with a powerful truth. Victory does not belong to the strong, but to those who walk with God. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the Golden Bible Story page on YouTube, follow on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. God bless you.